All right, Rabosai, good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsor for Tafshin Peher, annual Talmud Torah sponsor, the Tilson Mishpacha of Am Yisroel, for dedicating all of the shiurim and drashos this year as a zechus for besuros, tovos for Am Yisroel, Tilson Mishpacha of Am Yisroel. We thank them very much for their generosity, and hallelujah, we should be zochem eretz Hashem, that the tefillah and the bakash should be niskaim for all of Klal Yisrael. Our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Teves, the Kelman Family in memory of Amit Ben David Levy, Zichron Livracha, the brother of Itay Levy, who was killed fighting in Gaza on the first night of Chanukah. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, his neshama will have an aliyah and the family a nechama. And our week of learning sponsors, Rabbi Aryeh Chana Richter, in memory of Rabbi Richter's dear grandmother, Sarah Bas Shimon, Zichron Livracha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the neshama will have an aliyah, the family a nechama. Of course, as always, we dedicate our learning in the zechus of all of our precious hostages, may HaKadosh Baruch Hu bring them home b'shalom and b'karov, and the merit of our holy soldiers, may HaKadosh Baruch Hu allow them to be successful b'chol ma'aseh yedei. And so with that, let us begin. Today's daf is Mem Gimel 43. We are up to 42b. Mem Beis Amud Beis. You have a lot to do today. Minhani Mili. Let's just pick up from Minhani Mili, which is pretty much right smack in the middle of Amud Beis, right across from Tosos V'ne'emar. So the Gemara says, so how do we know that in general, when someone is executed, they have to be taken out of all three machnos? Remember, again, we spoke about this idea that the setup of the way Jewish community was modeled, or I should say, the setup of Jewish community was very much modeled after the way we encamped in the desert. So in the desert, you had three camps: Machane Shechina, which represented the Mishkan in the middle; Machane Leviyah, which is where the Leviim camped around; and then Machane Yisrael, which was everyone else. So, for example, Yerushalayim has that same setup. So the Beis HaMikdash, that's Machane Shechina; Harabayis, Machane Leviyah; the rest of Yerushalayim, Machane Yisrael. So the idea over here that we've been working on is that when you execute someone, you have to take them out of all three machanos, all three camps. So it says the Gemara in Hanimili, where do you know this from? Because the pasuk says, go ahead and take the makal. Now also, for context purposes, it's important to understand that there are two cases of Nisas Bezdin, right? Two cases of people who were executed in the desert. There was the Makalal, who was the person who cursed HaKadosh Baruch Hu in public, and then there was the Makoshesh Eitzim, the person who was Makalal, violated Shabbos publicly in the desert as well. Those are the two cases of execution that we have in the desert. So the Gemara Torah says, take out the Makalal, take out the person who cursed HaKadosh Baruch Hu, take him out of the camp, and go ahead and execute him. So the Gemara Darshan, what does it mean? It means take him out of all three camps. Take him out of all three camps in order to go and execute him. So the Gemara says, so you say take him out of all three camps. Maybe it doesn't mean all three camps. Maybe it just means take him out of one of the camps. The Gemara says, it says over here, by the Makalo, by the guy who cursed the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Chutz l'machane. It says by the parim hanisrafim. Now, what are the parim hanisrafim? If you look at Rashi says there are parim hanisrafim. There are two bulls that they're referring to over here. Number one is par helam davar shal tzibor. So this is the specific and unique offering that was made when the Sanhedrin ruled incorrectly. If the Sanhedrin delivered an incorrect ruling, there was a particular type of carbon that was brought. That's called par helam davar minat tzibor. Or again, the Gemara Rashi says, Upar Kohen Mashiach. This was the par that was brought if the Kohen Gadol delivered an erroneous ruling as well. I'm just reading Rashi. Neither of these karbanos are consumed. Rather, Elan is strafin. They're burnt. Fine. So the Gemara says, just like by these paros, right? Just like by these parim, just like by these bull offerings, they are taken outside of all three camps to be burned. So the Gemara says, Afkan chutz shalosh machnos. So too over here, this lashon of hotzi by the Makalel is also outside of all three machnos. I have a hasam in. By the way, how do you know by the parim that they're taken out of all three camps? The Tanra Abanon, v'hotzi is called hapar amichos lamachana. Chutz l'shalosh machnos, because the pasuk says, "V'hotzies kol hapar al michos." You shall take the par, the entire par, outside of the camp. What does outside of the camp mean? Outside of all three camps. So the Gemara says, chutz l'shalosh machnos ata omer. Sorry, ata omer chutz l'shalosh machnos. So you're telling me it means all three camps. O eina elu chutz l'machana achas. How do you know? Maybe it means you take the parim outside of one of the camps. How do you know it means all three camps? Keshu omer el mi chutz l'machana bepar ha'ida. When the pasuk says chutz l'machana bepar ha'ida, shein talmud lomar, you don't require this pasuk, right? I don't need this chutz l'machana over here. The lashon of the v'hotzi es hapar el mi chutz l'machana v'saraf osa. I don't need that pasuk. I don't need that because I already know that you're taking the cow or the bull outside of the machana. Shein talmud lomar shari kvar ne'amar v'saraf osa. Kasher saraf es hapar harishon. It already tells me that I'm going ahead and burning this par as I burnt the other par, and just as the other par is burnt outside of the machanos, so too this one is as well. So the Gemara says, what is it going to teach me? Litin lo machana shniya. It's going to teach me the second v'hotzi oso michutz l'machana. It's going to teach me removal from a second camp. A second camp. So the Gemara says, Litin lo machana shniya. And then when it says a third time al michutz lamachana by the trumas hadeshin, the taking out of the ash, shein talmud lomar, that's also unnecessary. Why? Shari kvar ne'amar al shefach hadeshin yisaref litin lo machana shlishis. That comes to teach me a third machana. So essentially, the repetition of this phrase al michutz lamachana, which is unnecessary in a number of different contexts, teaches me that whatever is taken outside of the camp is taken outside of all three camps. So why not learn it out from shchutei chutz? So remember again, shchutei chutz refers to the prohibition to shecht a carbon outside of the Beis HaMikdash. Now, where does this apply? This applies anywhere outside of the Beis HaMikdash, right? This is not dafka just chutz l'shalosh machanos. So, for example, remember again, where am I supposed to shecht a carbon? Inside of the Beis HaMikdash, what we'll call machane shchina. Even if you shecht the carbon outside of one camp, in let's say machane leviyah, you're also chayiv for that. So the Gemara says, maybe we should learn out over here that halacha l'maisa, that whenever it says chutz l'machane, that's even one machane. The Gemara says, learn out from shchutei chutz. Just like by shchutei chutz, you can't go ahead and offer up a carbon outside of even one camp. Afkan. So too over here. Now what's the here? The here is by the mekalo, right? The here is the case of execution. So too by the case of execution, maybe execution just has to take place outside of what? One camp as well. So the Gemara says, so essentially what we see over here is as follows, just to highlight this. So we see a number of things that are done, quote unquote, outside of the camps, right? We know that execution is done outside of the camps. We know that the par ha'elam davar min hatzibor and the par kohen Mashiach are burned outside of the camps. Now we happen to know that those two parim, let's let me frame it differently. Parim are burnt outside of all three camps. That we know that, okay? We've established that just before. Shchutei chutz, the prohibition to shecht the carbon outside of the Beis HaMikdash, applies even outside of one camp. Okay, so now I have two situations where things are done outside of the camp. Shchutei chutz, even one camp. Parim, all three camps. Now the Torah tells me by execution, b'hotzi oso al michutz lamachana. Take the person you're going to execute and execute him outside of the camp. What don't I know? How many camps? Where am I executing him? Now the issue is, the Gemara originally wanted to compare the execution to the parim. And therefore, just as the parim are done outside of all three camps, so too execution is done outside of all three camps as well. To which the Gemara just says, well, how do you know? Maybe you should compare execution to what? To shchutei chutz. And shchutei chutz is only outside of one camp. Therefore, maybe execution is only done also outside of one camp. That's the shayla. So the Gemara says no. The Gemara says, good. No, it makes more sense to go ahead and compare execution to the parim. Why? Shekein hotzei al michutz lamachana machshir u'mechaper. Because execution and parim share all of these similarities. First of all, there are linguistical similarities. Lashon of hotzei applies by both. Al michutz lamachana by both. machshir, both are preparatory acts, and mechaper, both provide atonement. So it makes more sense to compare execution to the parim. Gemara says, no, adrabah, mishchutei chutz havlei lemelech. I can go ahead and learn out from Mishchutei Chutz. Why? Shekin Adam Chote Bineshama Pigel. Because again, on the other hand, you could compare execution to Shchutei Chutz in all of these other ways. There's Lashon of Adam, right? Lashon of Chote. Both have liability paying with life, and Pigel. Both are subject to Pigel. Those are the similarities. So Gemara says, no. Machshir mi machshir adiflei. It is better to go ahead and learn out one preparatory act from another preparatory act. So therefore, Abba said the Gemara seems intent on linking execution with the parim. And just as the parim are done outside of all three machanos, so too execution is also done outside of all three machanos. Okay, incredible. So says the Gemara, Rapapa says, Rapapa Amar Moshe Hecha Havi Yosef. So Rapapa takes another approach. He says, let's look at this. Where was Moshe Rabbeinu? In the desert, where was Moshe Rabbeinu situated? So the Gemara says, B'machane Levia. Moshe Rabbeinu lived in Machane Levia. Right? Remember again, Moshe Rabbeinu, he didn't live in Machane Shechina, right? Because that was the Mishkan. He didn't live in the Mishkan. He was situated in Machane Levia. And the Torah, when speaking to Moshe, because Moshe Rabbeinu was responsible for carrying out the execution, not literally himself, but ultimately for overseeing it, Torah says to him, Moshe, take the makal, take the guy who cursed the Kodesh Baruch Hu, take him outside of the camp. So the Gemara says, maybe it only means chutz l'machana leviyah. So that means again outside of machana leviyah. So the Gemara says, and then there's another lashon. The Torah says they took the makalel outside of the machana. So there's another hotzah. What does that refer to? Chutz l'machana Yisrael. That means the chutz l'machana Yisrael. So again, so Rabbi say, interestingly enough, everyone is agreeing in principle on the concept, which is that the person is being executed outside of all three camps. So let's not focus over here. How do I arrive at that conclusion? So now Papa has a different approach. Tushmar says, no. Hi, mi baile la asiya. No. That last phrase of vayotziu esamakala amichutz lamachana, that phrase, that's not necessarily teaching they actually carried out the execution. In other words, that is an important pasuk, not for limud purposes. Tushmar says, no. Asiya behedjiksiv. That's not true. The Torah explicitly says that they executed the guy who cursed the Kodesh Baruch Hu. Where does it say? Top of Mem Gimel 43a. U'bnei Yisrael asu kasher tziva Hashem es Moshe. The pasuk says, and Klal Yisrael did as Hashem commanded Moshe. Ela me'ata. But based on that, what about the pasuk that says vayirgimu oso aven? So the pasuk says that they went ahead and they stoned him. They stoned the Mekalel. So my avdile, what do you need with that pasuk? That pasuk says that they carried out the execution. It's very interesting. This is required also for a different pasuk, for a different halacha. What does it teach us? What does it mean that they stoned him? So the Gemara says oso v'lo b'ksuso. So we're going to talk about this. So it means that when they stoned him and not with his clothing. Meaning what? So the Gemara says that halacha l'maisa, we'll see this halacha, when they would subject a person to skila, men, that ultimately, again, they would stone them unclothed. The idea is that it would hasten the death, right? Because again, if they're stone clothed, that's another barrier. That other barrier could prolong death. So therefore, again, vayigimu oso. Oso means you stone the individual, i.e. the person without any other layers, i.e. no clothing. Evan, we're going to learn from Evan, she'im meis be'evan achas yatsa, that if you go ahead and you stone him with one stone and he dies as a result of one stone, that halacha l'maisa you yotze. In other words, I would have thought that skila, by definition, requires multiple stones. Kamashlan if you come with one stone. Now, again, Abba said we haven't gotten into this. It's actually interesting sugi. We'll see it in 2 days from now, that there's a process for how you administer the punishment, the onesh of skila. So we'll discuss that in Meretz Hashem. So Gemara says, so it's interesting, right? When it comes to stoning, the Torah uses a singular lashon of stone and then a plural lashon of avanim, stones. So the Gemara says you need both. Why do you need both? The Gemara says, Di chasav rachmana evan. If it would have just said evan singular, havamina heichadolo meis bechada lo nisi achrisa miktali. I would have felt like this. Essentially, when administering skila, What do you have? You have like one shot. If you get it right the first time, if you kill the guy with the stone the first time, then fine. But if somehow he escapes death that first stone, he's free. Therefore, the Gemara says, Lo neisei achrisium miktai chasav rachmana avonim. Therefore, the Torah says avonim. What does avonim teach us? Avonim teaches us that halacha l'maisa, again, you're going to stone him. And if it takes one stone, it takes one stone. If it takes multiple stones, it takes multiple stones. Furthermore, because of rachmana avonim, if the Torah would have just said avonim, hava mina meikara naisi tarti. I would have said from the beginning, you have to bring 2 stones. Because of rachmana even. Therefore, the Torah comes along and says, Evan, you start with 1 stone. Ayvaha, haytana ne'emar ka'amar. I will say, here's the issue. So now, just by the way, just as an aside, this skila information, this is a side point right now. Remember, let's keep focused. What do we focus? What have we been introduced to over here? That when we execute someone, we execute them where? Outside of all 3 camps. Now, interestingly enough, the way this was introduced to us is as a pasuk, Ne'emar. The Torah says, "V'hotzi osam michutz lamachaneh." Now it turns out that in reality, it sounds like we're learning this out from where? From a Gzera Shava. So the Gemara says, well, which one is it? So the Gemara says, "V'ha haytana ne'emar ka'amar." The Tana introduces us by saying that this is learned out from a pasuk, not a Gzera Shava. So the Gemara says, Ilu lo ne'emar ka'amar. So the Gemara says, Ilu no lo ne'emar ka'amar v'chamar. Ilu lo ne'emar kra. Hayisi Omer Gzera Shava, Achshav Sha'amar Kra, Gzera Shava Lo Tzarech. So the Gemara says, you're right. In reality, we learn out the fact that we execute someone outside of all 3 camps from a pasuk. But had we not had a pasuk that made that statement, then what? Then Allah Chalamaysa, we would be able to learn it out from a Gzera Shava. Okay, let's say first wide line. Ravashi says, Moshe Heichal Yosef. Where was Moshe Rabbeinu situated? So the Gemara says, as we said before, the Machna Leviyah. Moshe Rabbeinu was situated in Machna Leviyah. Rabbi Rachmana, Chotzi Esem Akala, Chutz Lamachana Leviyah. So the Gemara says, I'm sorry. Rachmana, Chotzi Esem Akala. So remember again, so Moshe Rabbeinu is situated in Machna Leviyah. The Torah, in speaking to Moshe, says, take the makalo, take the cursor, outside of the machana. What does that refer to? Chutz the machana leviyah. So that refers to step number 1 is taking him out of machana leviyah. El michutz the machana. Then it says el michutz the machana a second time. What does that mean? That's chutz lemachana Yisrael. That refers ultimately again to taking him out of machana Yisrael. Then the pasuk says they took out the makalo la'asiyah. That pasuk, that third statement means they actually did it. They carried through on it. So the Gemara says, Asiya, right, that they carried through on it, Bedjuk Sibu. That we already said that. Bnei Yisrael, Asu, Kashet Siv Hashem as Moshe. Pasuk already says, Klal Yisrael did as Moshe Rabbeinu commanded. To which the Gemara says, no. Hahu mibayle chad l'smicha v'chad l'dchiyah. So we're going to see that pasuk is necessary for another detail. We'll say what we're going to call smicha and dechiyah. So again, we'll talk about all of these items. So the Gemara says over here, essentially the Gemara talks about the idea that when we execute someone, it's actually quite interesting. When we execute someone, before we execute them, there's a smicha. There's a laying of hands on them. Again, we'll talk about exactly what that means. And then also by skila, what we're going to see is the process is, first we throw a person off a high roof. The goal is that they're liable to death. They should die by impact. Right? That's the goal. If they don't die on impact, then we bring in the stones. Right? So the idea over here is the Gemara says over here, there's a placing of the hands, and ultimately again, then there's a dechiyah, pushing. Now again, we'll discuss, by the way, that it's the witnesses, interestingly enough, who have the obligation of pushing. Right? Which makes a lot, we'll say, understand, sometimes you hear this stuff, you're like, what is this? So just understand, remember, this is against the backdrop. We've now seen the kishkas of the legal system. And we have seen how the system is absolutely stacked to prevent executions. Right? We've seen this. In other words, the ability for a court to actually be able to render a capital ruling after everything we've seen is virtually impossible. So again, we're not finished with that as well. But nevertheless, there's the concept of smicha and dechia, to which the Gemara says, Amar Rabbanan Rav Ashi, Ledidach, so Rabbanan says Rashi as follows, according to you, Kol Hani Hotzi Dichse Beparman Asrafim, Mai Drashta Behu. So the Rabbanan says Rashi, you're darshaning all of these Hotzi Min HaMachanes. What do you do with all of these Hotzis that are mentioned by the Parman Asrafim, which again is the Par Helam, Davar Ben Atzibar, Par Kohen Mashiach, to which the Gemara says, Kasha. Rashi says, yeah, I don't know. So you guys a lot of hotzis. Okay, so I'll say, what's our takeaway? Our takeaway is that Allah, when we execute someone. So first of all, we're introduced really to two concepts. Number one, that execution was not done in Beis Din. This is very important. For two reasons that we saw in yesterday's daf. Why wasn't execution done in Beis Din? Number one, that people should not think that Beis Din is eager to execute anyone. And number two, by moving the execution space outside of Beis Din, it buys a little bit more time for the defendant should new proof for exoneration come to bear. That's number one. So I'll say, how far outside of Beis Din do we place the execution spot? So again, we've established 3 machnos, right? The assumption we're working with is Beis Din always operates within the city proper. That's what we're making the assumption of it. So for example, let's say using Yerushalayim as a model, where does the Sanhedrin operate? Where does the Sanhedrin operate? In the Beis HaMikdash, in Machane Shechina. So therefore again, where are you executing? Outside of Machane Shechina, then again, outside of Machane Leviah, outside of Machane Yisrael. So execution is happening outside of all 3 machanos. Incredible. Fine. Says the Gemara, Echad Omeid. So the Gemara says, listen to this. So remember, the other thing that we saw in the Mishnah was this fascinating idea. So let's play this out, right? Reuven was accused of killing Shimon. Witnesses came along, and let's say Beis Din paskind that Reuven is liable to death. So remember again, they're now going to lead Reuven out to the Beis HaSkila. The Beis HaSkila is situated outside of all 3 camps. Remember, what would they do? They put a guy with a flag by the entranceway of Beis Din. Remember again from yesterday's stuff, a guy with a flag. Another guy in ocular, right, in the greatest amount of ocular distance on a horseback, right? And then what would happen if Beis Din would find some new proof? Flag guy would wave his flag, horse guy would gallop out to the execution, stop everything, bring the defendant back to Beis Din. Okay, so we'll say, so this is great. So Gemara says, Amar Avuna, Pshitali, Echad Evan Sheniskal Ba, Ve'echad Eit Shenitla Ba, Ve'echad Shais Shenerag Bo, Ve'echad Sudu Shenechnak Bo. So we'll say, so Rav Huna says like this, it is clear to me that the stones used for stoning, right, the tree used for hanging, the sword used for beheading, the rope used for strangulation, Kulan Mishal Tzibor. Right? I was supposed to say, this is great, by the way, right? This is such a Jewish sugya. You know what the sugya is about? When we execute someone, who's paying for it? Right? Who's paying for it? In other words, look, execution costs money, right? Who is footing the bill for this? So the Gemara says, it is clear to me that when Beis Din is carrying out an execution, obviously, the mechanism of execution is paid for by communal funds. Right? Because remember again, this is the community that's going ahead and executing the individual. So the stone used for execution, the tree used for hanging, the sword used for beheading, the rope or we call it the rope, used for strangulation, all of these Mishal Tzibor. This is paid from communal funds. My timer, what's the reason for this? Because the Gemara says it doesn't really make sense to tell a person, by the way, we're going to execute you, and you're sponsored by you, right? Right. Today's execution of Reuven is sponsored by the Schwartz Mishpacha, right? Right. Le'ilu Nishmas, Reuven. You can't. I want to say, by the way, I just want to point out something. If you think about it, actually, yes, you can. Like, why should I pay for Reuven's execution, right? In other words, let Reuven pay for his own execution. In other words, Reuven got himself into this mess, right? Why is this coming from communal funds? So it's interesting, because if you look at Lashon Gemara, the Gemara says, logically, it should come from Reuven, right? If a person is executed, part of the penalty should be that you or your estate pays for your execution. So the Gemara says the reason we don't do it is, you know why? It doesn't look right. It doesn't feel that that's appropriate to ask a person or to tell a person that they should pay for their own execution. Okay, fine. So now we've established that. Listen to this. So by Rav Huna, Suda Shemanifin Bo, Versus Sharatzu Ma'amidan, Mishel Mihu. But this is actually, so let's go back to the Mishnah. Right? So now Reuven's been sentenced to die. So what happens? As Reuven is being taken out to the Beis Haskila, so what does the Mishnah say? We have flag guy standing by the Beis Din. We have horse guy. Who's paying for those people? Flag guy is not working for free, right? And horse guy is not working for free. So who's paying them? Who's paying them? Mishal Muhu. On one hand, Kevan Datzala Didei Mididehu. On one hand, we say, look, who are these guys really working for? Who are they really working for? They're working for Reuven, right? And they're benefiting Reuven. So really, Reuven should have to pay for flag guy. Reuven should have to pay for horse guy. Right? The Gemara says. On the other hand, Dilma, Kevan de Beidina Mechayvan Me'avid Bahatzala Medidao. On the other hand, no. This really is an obligation on Beis Din, right? Because the obligation on Beis Din is to try to the best of their ability, to exonerate. So really, again, the Gemara is really asking over here, who is this benefiting? On one hand, it's benefiting Reuven. There's introducing some last minute evidence. On the other hand, it's part of the function of Beis Din, because Beis Din has an obligation to function in a way where they could exonerate. Therefore, I want to point out just how incredible this is. You see, both say it's not a new reality that Jewish organizations have to fundraise. Right? This is not a new reality, right? Jewish organizations are fundamentally dependent on donations. So therefore, again, there is not an inexhaustible supply of money to the Beis Din or to any Jewish organization. So it's interesting. So these to us, the question sounds almost like a little bit cute, but again, it's much like a question of economics. Who's paying for this? Who has the responsibility for this? Right? There is not an inexhaustible amount of money for the Beis Din or for any Jewish organization. So who is responsible over here? So again, that's the Shaila. So we'll say the Gemara says, Vesu, listen to this. This is great. Vesu, Hadam Rabbi Rav Ashi, Amar Rav Chista, Hayotzi lehareg. If someone is being executed, Mashkin also, Korat Shalavona B'Kol Shal Yayin. So listen to this. They would give him a special glass of wine. And in this glass of wine, they would put a korat shalavona. Lavona is frankincense, which is very expensive. They would put one of the ingredients for the ketoras. So they would give him this wine laced with frankincense. This wine laced with lavona. So apparently, what lavona does with wine, it's good to know, is that it enhances the intoxicating qualities of wine. Right? Now, why was this done? Kadesh to tarif daito. When a person is going to be executed, we wanted them to be essentially, we get them like a shtickle inebriated, right? It would be interesting to see how that actually worked. Can you imagine? Right? But Lamaisa, so they would say, I want to point out something very interesting. This is actually a very important Gemara. It will say, the Tami Amit Hagim brings down that when Yidden drink together, what do we say? We say l'chaim. Why do we say l'chaim when we drink? So the Tami Amit Hagim brings down, it's because of this Gemara. Because when they would execute someone, they would apply them with alcohol so that their senses would be dulled and wouldn't fully realize what was happening. Tamim and Hagim says, when we drink with each other, it should never be construed chas v'shalom that we're dulling our senses because of something negative that is going to occur. Sometimes people drink as an escape. Life is difficult, I'm drinking as an escape. That's not why a Yid drinks. A Yid never drinks to escape. A Yid drinks because a little bit of mashke, right, nichnas yayin yatsa sod, has the ability to not dull my senses, but open my eyes to, first of all, how much I love every single person, right? And how much love HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and how much bracha there is. Therefore, the Talmud Nagim says, when two Jews drink, they dafka say, l'chaim, to life. That it should, because drinking together is a life-affirming experience, not chas v'shalom, something done to dull the senses because something negative is going to occur. Mamish this Gemara, incredible. So the Gemara says as follows. So the Gemara says, so again, when they would execute someone, they'd give them a little bit of wine laced with lavona, kadesh tarv daito, in order that he shouldn't realize what's going on over here. Della sense as shneimar, tenu shechar laoved v'yayin lamari nefesh. Literally, again, give shechar. Shechar is like an intoxicating beverage. Give shechar to one who is lost, and wine to those who are bitter of soul. Which I will say, just as an aside, it's interesting. We saw some white cotton. The Gemara says, why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu create wine? Why did he create wine? For the koshel tanchumin. for the cup of consolation. Remembering, I will say, we learned this morning, Cotton, that when the person will come back from the Levaya, right, person would lose a loved one, what was the first thing you got when you came back from the Levaya? First thing is you got a big gulp, a wine big gulp, right? You got like a big glass of wine. Why? Because Chashon Baruch Hu created the wine sometimes to be able to take a little bit of the edge off of life. That's what Chashon Baruch Hu created, because sometimes, again, Tenu Yain Lemari Nefesh, give wine to those who are bitter of soul, sometimes a little bit, in moderation. In the case of the Aval, maybe a little bit more than normal, to take away a little bit of the bitterness. So the idea over here is, you would give a guy who is about to be executed, give him a l'chaim, give him a strong l'chaim, so that he should not be fully aware of what it is that's going on. So listen to this. The Gemara said, the Tanya, we learned, Nashim Yikar Shivishayim, Hayu Misnatvos, Umavios. This is fascinating. So who was this wine donated by? It was donated by the precious women of Yerushalayim. And I would say, isn't that incredible? So first of all, who were these Nashim Yikaros? Right, two of these precious women of Yerushalayim. They're the ones who donated the wine. I will say, it's interesting, by the way, that it's the women who donated the wine. Right? Why not men who donated the wine? So, well, maybe men are more reticent to part with their wine. That's possibility one. I will say, but it's also the idea that women generally possess a much greater empathy than men do. So you can imagine that what would happen? Men see Reuven's being executed, right? What's the Chevra saying? What's the Chevra saying as Reuven is being led out to execution? I knew it. I'm telling you, that guy, he had it coming. Right? Very little in the empathy well. Women possess deep reservoirs of empathy. So you can see again how the Nashim Yikaros of Yerushalayim, when seeing someone who's going to be executed, again, maybe he deserves it. It's still tragic. And therefore, again, they would donate the wine. So let's listen to this. The Gemara says, okay, lo isnadvu. Let's say no one donated the execution wine. No one donated the execution wine. So the Gemara says, Mishelmi, right? Mishelmi, who's paying for it? Once again, we'll say, Tachlis, economics. If there are no Nashim Yikaros, right? No one donated the execution wine, so who is paying for it? No, the truth is, that's actually a pretty easy one, because it sounds like that clearly comes from community funds. Why? If you look at Lashon al-Pasuk, is Tenu Shechar La'oved V'yan. It's Tenu is plural. So the fact that there is a plurality associated with that pasuk indicates to us that it comes from the tzibor. Okay, so that's fine. So that's an easy one. If we know that there's no one to donate the wine, that comes from community funds. So the Gemara said, I will say again. So I just want to point out, the Gemara doesn't resolve it, right? So the Gemara says, I understand that the actual tools for execution that actually comes from community funds. The wine, execution wine, if there's not a donor, that comes from community funds. So the Shaila said the Gemara didn't answer is who pays for flag guy, who pays for horse guy. That the Gemara doesn't answer. I think Gemara doesn't answer. Okay, so Gemara says, so listen to this, finish static, watch this. So let's remember again, and it's great because all of these sugyas coming together. Remember again, you had the Sanhedrin. Who was sitting in front of the Sanhedrin? Who was sitting there? In front of the Sanhedrin? 3 rows of students. Now remember again, we saw that in the deliberations, if one of the students says, I have an argument to exonerate, what would they do? They'd put him on the basin. Okay, so watch this. There's an interesting case here. So let's say one of the students says, yes, I have an argument to exonerate. And what happened? Beneshtatek. He became mute. So in other words, he said he had an argument, but he never got to advance the argument. Beneshtatek. So Mahu, what is the halacha? So Menafech Rav Sheshes Biadei. So Rav Sheshes says, interesting. Menafech Rav Sheshes Biadei means Rav Sheshes like waved. What's the word like when you wave someone off? Dismissed, right? He like waved like in a dismissive way. So in the shtatek, afilu echa b'sofa olam nami. Come on, or if somebody becomes mute and they can't advance an argument, because in other words, otherwise, we should be choshish that maybe there's someone on the other end of the world who has some type of argument on behalf of the defendant as well. In other words, if you could say it, you could say it. If you can't say it, you can't say it. Just because someone said, I have something to say, and then he lost the power of speech, we can't accept that at all. To which the Gemara says, no. It's different. Because to be choshesh for someone who may or may not exist at the other end of the world, okay, that's a possibility. And we have no reason to think that suggests. Over here, the student literally said, hey chevra, Beis Din, Sanhedrin, I have something to say. He stepped forward. He just never got a chance to say it. To which the Gemara says, Tashma, let's analyze. Rabbi Yossi, so let's listen to this. If you have one of the students who said, Rabbosai, I have an argument to advance to exonerate the defendant. And what happened? And Rabbosai, he's put on the Beis Din, and then he died. Rowan also kilu chai, va'omin b'mkomo v'zicha, right? Va'omin b'mkomo. So the halacha is, we count his opinion even though he's dead. Right? We count his opinion even though he died. So the Gemara says, zicha in, lo zicha lo. So we'll say, so what do you see from here? It's only if he actually advanced the opinion. In other words, if a TALMUD says, I have grounds to exonerate, and we put him on the Beis Din, and he advances his opinion, and then he died, okay, so we can still count his opinion even after he died. But that's because he articulated it. So the Gemara says, zicha in, lo zicha lo. To which the Gemara says, zicha pshitali. Amar tibaylacha. So the Gemara says, you're right. Obviously, if the student advanced his opinion and then he died, so the chiddush is, I could count his opinion even though he's dead. The shaila, Rabbi is what? The shaila is in our case, where what happens if a student stepped forward and a student said, I have grounds to exonerate, but he never quite gets around to actually saying it. Can we count that as something or not? So ultimately, again, the Gemara kind of ends off with a kasha. Okay, so the Gemara begins to say, afilu, remember again, the next part of the Mishnah said, it's really a fascinating Mishnah. The next part of the Mishnah said was as follows. Ruvain, right, let's play this forward. Ruvain is in the Beis Haskila about to be executed. Ruvain is about to be executed. So remember again, now what happens over here? Now Ruvain says, wait, I realized I have an argument to exonerate myself. So we'll say, what's the halacha? So the Gemara says, Machzirin also afilu arba v'chamisha pamim. So we go ahead and we bring him back even 4 or 5 times. Right? We'll keep bringing him back. So the Gemara says, Va'afilu pam. Now the issue the Gemara says is that with a caveat. What's the caveat? Ubilvad, the Mishnah said, last words of the Mishnah, Ubilvad sheyesh mamish b'dvarav. As long as what? As long as it appears that there's some substance to what he's saying. In other words, that halacha l'maisa, we're happy to bring him back. We really are legitimately happy to bring him back. But we have to make sure that there is some level of substance to whatever it is that he's saying. Can you imagine this? Otherwise, he's just like, I realize I have something to say. Right? Moshe gave the good mashal yesterday of like putting your kids to bed, right? Little kids before bed. Wait, one more thing. One more thing. So at a certain point, there's nothing else. We've spoken about everything. You've eaten every snack already. There's nothing else. So this is an important caveat. So in other words, if Ruvain says, oh no, I realize I have one more piece of evidence. So the Mishnah says, fine, we'll take you back as many times as you have to, but however, there has to be some level of substance associated with what it is that you're saying. So now the Gemara asks an interesting question. Is that true? Is that true every time? In other words, let's say Ruvain's at the Beis Haskila, and he says, first time he says, oh, don't kill me yet. I realize I have new evidence. I just thought of something, taking back to Beis Din. So do we have to investigate that claim already the first time or second time he says that, or only like if we're up to time number 3, 4, or 5? So the Gemara says, Vatanya, we learned, Pan Rishonu Shniya, Ben Sheyesh Mamish B'Dvarav, Ben She'ein Mamish B'Dvarav, Machzirin also. Also we learned that if he does this, the first or second time that Ruvain does this, kind of just give him a pass. Give him a pass. First or second time he says, Chevra, I have new evidence. What do? We take him back. We take him back to Beis Din, and we allow him to go ahead and say whatever it is that he has to say. Sounds like it's only from time 3 and on that we need a little investigation over there at the Beis Haskila to make sure that he's legitimate in what it is. There's some legitimacy. Mekan ve'iloch, from time 3 and on, im yesh mamish b'dvar machzirin oso, im mamish b'dvar im machzirin oso. if there's some legitimacy, mamish, right? If there's some depth, some legitimacy to what he's saying, fine, we'll take him back. If there's no legitimacy, we're not taking him back. Rapapa targemua bipam shnei ve'elech. You're right. Rapapa says like this. Read that. So Rapapa says that's very interesting. So what it sounds like is like this. For the first 2 times, you kind of get like a get out of skila free card. In other words, we'll take you back. We'll take you back from the Beis HaSkila to the Beis Din. No questions asked. You say you have new evidence? Fine. We'll take you back. From time 3 and on, if you claim that you have new evidence, we're going to need to substantiate that a little bit, right, on the spot before we're taking you back. So the Gemara said, "Mina yadi." So it says, "Here's the shaila. How do you know?" In other words, okay. So first 2 times it doesn't matter. First 2 times, as long as Reuven says, "Chevra, I have new evidence," we take him back. From second time and on, how do you know if he's telling the truth? In other words, if there's some legitimacy to his words. This is very interesting. Rabbi Aryeh Demaswina lezuga derabanan. So interestingly enough, we bring 2 Talmidei Chachamim to the Beis HaSkila. Fascinating, no? I ikamamish dvarav in lo. So essentially, we bring 2 Talmidei Chachamim to the Beis HaSkila, and they say, "Okay, Reuven, what do you got?" Right? And if after he says it, they're like, "Oh, okay, saying good," then we'll go ahead and we'll listen to him. But otherwise, again, we're just going to execute him. So the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, in other words, if you're furnishing 2 Talmidei Chacham to kind of vet the claim a little bit from time 3 and on, why don't you just what? Have them, the 2 Talmidei Chacham there from the beginning. Have them there from the beginning and have them vet the claim from time 1 and on. To which the Gemara says, Agav de bois, lo matzi amar kol mai diislei. Well, I say, so understandably so, Reuven is probably a little bit nervous, right? So in the beginning, he may not be able to fully articulate the rationale for his innocence. Especially, I will say, can you imagine at the execution spot? Right? That's got to be profoundly overwhelming, right? Reuven's about to be executed. He's like, I have no evidence. Understandably, so he may be a bit flustered, a tad flustered. So therefore, again, what we do is for the first 2 times, we bring him back to Beis Din so that he could compose himself a little bit. From time 3 and on already, again, this has happened a couple of times already. If you got something to say, say it. Say it, and the two Talmidei Chacham will be there to vet it. Incredible, I'll say. Good. So I'll say, get ready for this. We're good. These sugyas are ridiculous. Mishnah. Matzlo zechus patro. So I'll say, so again, now this is all a progression, right? All the progression. It's actually Mishnah is like this, and sugyas like this are very exciting because literally, again, they're flowing just one into the other. So now, let's say it turns out that they exonerate Reuven, right? It turns out you're right. Either they exonerated him, or it's this case where they brought him back to the Beis HaSkila afterwards, and it turns out that in fact he really does not deserve to be executed. So what's halacha? So matzuah lo zechus patro. So they found grounds to exonerate. Then they exonerate him. Ve'im lav, and if not, yotzu lisakel. They take him out to be stoned. So the Gemara says, ukruz yotzei lefanov. Listen to this. There was an announcer who went out before Reuven, and what would he say? Ish ploni ben ploni, yotze lisakel al sha'avar plonis uplonis. Right. So Reuven, the son of Yaakov, is going out to be executed because he committed the following crime. So we articulate his name, the name of his father, the crime that he committed. Uploni edav, and so are the witnesses who condemned him. Kol mi sheyodea lo zechus. Whoever knows some type of exonerating evidence, come forward now. So we'll say, so this announcement really does 2 things. Number 1, the announcement publicly shames the offender, which is part of his kapara, part of his atonement process. The announcement also puts the general populace on warning. On warning, there is accountability for what you do. And there's always accountability for what you do. And number 3, which is really most important over here, is it's a last-ditch effort to find someone who maybe knows information that could lead to the exoneration of Reuven. That's really the goal over here. So the Gemara says, Amar Abaye, v'tzarach l'meimar biyom ploni u'ploni b'shah ploni tz'makom ploni dilma ika diyadi v'asu meizam lu. So what says incredible? Abaye says, by the way, you have to add in some more information. What's the other information? So and so are the witnesses, right? And they witnessed killing Reuven on Tuesday at 3 p.m. in Tel Aviv. Why do you put out that information? Because Rabbi say there may be no one who knows exonerating evidence for Ruvain, but maybe there's someone who what? He says, witnesses saw Ruvain kill Shimon on Tuesday, 3 p.m. in Tel Aviv. That's interesting because they were having shawarma with us at a gas station outside of Yerushalayim, right at that same time, right? That doesn't seem to make so much sense. So because of that, ultimately, again, it gives us the ability to cross-examine. So the Gemara says as follows. Good. So the Gemara says, "V'kruz yotze lefanov." So the Gemara says, and we have an announcer that goes out in front of the defendant. So the Gemara says, "Lefanov in meikara lo." So it says, this is interesting. Now, there seems to be a piece missing from the Gemara over here, because the way it reads is they have an announcer now, but not beforehand. The Rashi says, Arboim Yom Kodem, not 40 days beforehand. So actually, if you have the Agos V'tziyunim, you can see over here, he mentions in the footnotes, I used to be able to see this level of print, right? He mentions over here that Nimchak, that there's pieces of this Gemara that were taken out, Okay, but it means the Gemara is just intrigued by the idea that halacha l'maisa, we're going ahead and putting an announcer now, but we didn't put an announcer earlier on. Okay, Amit Beis. This is a ridiculous Gemara. I'm going to Shimon Levy. Shimon Levy says as follows. So literally translated. If you go, sorry. I don't know. You have more lines? Got it. Okay, good. We're just using a regular Gemara. All right. So I'm Rabbi Shmuel Levy. Now Yomi base 43b. We do not have the luxury of adding in more Gemara. Okay, I can't get through the stipulated amount. Don't give me more. I'm Rabbi Shmuel Levy. Kol hazaveach as Yisro. Whoever goes ahead and literally sacrifices his yetzer, right? Misvad alav, and does vidui, confesses. Ma'ala alav akasav kilo kibla kodesh baruch hu b'shnei olam. Treats as if he has Anurach kodesh baruch hu in two worlds. Now, this is actually a really dramatically beautiful Gemara. Take a look at Rashi. So Rashi says, la'achar she'esiso lachto. If the yetzer entices me to sin, huzovcho v'hargo. So we'll say, so now, the way the Rashi understands it says as follows. So, my yetzer enticed me to sin. After my yetzer entices me to sin, zovcho, I sacrifice, which means I subdue it, and ultimately, again, I decimate it, and I do tshuva, and I go ahead and confess my sins. So according to Rashi, what's happened over here is as follows. I fell prey to my yetzer. I give in to my yetzer hara, I sinned. But afterwards, again, I overcome my yetzer hara. I subdue my yetzer hara. I confess. I do tshuva for my averos, and I confess my averos. That is such a spiritually Herculean task and accomplishment that it's as if I have honored the Kadosh Baruch Hu in two worlds. Ha'olam hazeh va'olam haba. D'chsiv zoveach toda yichab dineni. Ultimately, again, he offers a toda, a thanksgiving offering, yichab dineni, two nuns. The nuns representing this idea of sharing Kadosh Baruch Hu in this world and the next world. I just want to point out something amazing. If you look at the lashon over here, is, it doesn't say like kala kovesh es yitzro. It says kala zoveach es yitzro. So I was saying, the most incredible thing to understand is when we overcome the desire to sin, essentially, HaKadosh Baruch Hu treats that as if I'm offering a carbon. As we're going to see the juxtaposition in just a moment. See, I want to be able to commit an avera. I want to be able to do something. I want to indulge a yetzer, right? I want to be able to do that. When I don't indulge my yetzer, I am giving up something for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's a tremendous thing. We speak about the inability to offer up karbanos in the absence of basement. Shabbos say every single day I have an opportunity to offer up karbanos. What kind of carbon? I want to do something. I want to do an avera. I want to do an avera. Hineni muchan umazuman, right? L'shem yuchud kudshabrichu. I want to do an avera. I have a desire for it. I have a want. I have a drive for it. If I'm able to muster up the inner strength not to do that avera, that's a carbon. That's an offering that I am making to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And I both say, that is perhaps the most dramatic carbon that one could ever offer. When you take something, then I take something that I want very badly, and I sacrifice that because Kadosh Baruch Hu wants something different for me, the highest level of carbon a Yid could offer. And when you offer that type of personalistic carbon, the Gemara says, it is as if I am honoring HaKadosh Baruch Hu in this world and in the next. Incredible. The Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara is Rabbi Shmuel Levy, and I will say, when you look at the Gemara that way, the juxtaposition makes a lot more sense. Rabbi Shmuel Levy, when the Beis HaMikdash stood, Adam Makriv Ola, Schar Ola Biyado. So a person goes and offers up an Ola, you get credit for an Ola, right? Mincha, Schar Mincha Biyado. You offer up a Mincha, you get credit for a Mincha. Avam. So we'll say, in other words, when the Beis HaMikdash stood, when you offer up a carbon, you get reward for the particular carbon you offered. However, listen to this, Avami Shedaito Shvela. Now we'll say, but someone who's that, now what does Daito Shvela mean? Daito Shvela we often translate as humble, But the Marsha actually has a different idea over here. The Marsha says that Daito Shvela is Ruach Nishma, the Hainu Sheshav B'chol Libo. The Marsha says that ultimately Daito Shvela means someone who is a Baal Tshuva. We'll say, what does it mean to be a Baal Tshuva? What it means to Baal Tshuva means I sinned. And now when faced with the opportunity to sin again, this time I say, Ribono Shalom, I'm sacrificing what I want for what you want. That's Daito Shvela. That's a Baal Tshuva. We'll say a Baal Tshuva is not someone who never sinned, because someone who never sinned doesn't need to be a Baal Tshuva. Baal Tshuva is someone who's tasted sin, enjoys sin, is good at sin. Everybody's got to be good at something, right? Is good at sin. And now I want to do it again, and I say, no, I'm not doing it. Not because I don't want to, not because the fires of desire anymore diminish, but because, Chash Baruch Hu, what I'm doing now in this moment is, I'm putting your needs above my needs. I'm sacrificing what I want for what you want. When a person rises to that level, Daito Shir, listen to this, Ma'ala alav akasav ki'ilu hikriv kala karbanos kulan. It is as if you have offered up every single carbon. Shenemar zivchei elokim ruach nishpara. They will say, because the highest level of carbon that we could offer is when we offer up our own desire on the altar of the Ribono Shalom. When I go ahead and I sacrifice what I want because of what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants, that is the highest level of carbon that exists in this world. And when I offer up that kind of carbon, it's as if I've offered up every other type of sacrifice under the sun. Not only that, such a person possesses a dramatic koach at his tefillah is never rejected. Literally, again, a broken heart, a broken spirit, a downtrodden spirit. Ultimately, HaKadosh Baruch Hu never despised. Rabbi said the greatest carbon we could offer is not a olah, is not a shalom. The greatest carbon we could offer is the carbon of our own desires. When I sacrifice what I want, because it's more important to do what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants. That's the highest level of carbon. When you make that kind of sacrifice, it's treated as if you've made every other carbon on the face of the earth. Not only that, when I'm willing to make that sacrifice, I have a special koach hatfilah, a special power of prayer. I will say we'll have to stop over for today. Okay, good. Shkayach, everyone. Tomorrow's Rosh Chodesh. Have a good day. We'll be fine. All right, have a great day, everyone.